2.
All right, thank you, everybody. This is the full commission meeting for the Northampton Policing Review Commission. This is going to be a meeting held on Zoom. It's Tuesday, February 16th. We'll go from 6 to 8 p.m. Our first order of business is a call to order. Noah, can you read us off?
Yeah. Booker.
Here.
Dan.
Here.
Nick.
Nick is here, but I don't think that he can unmute himself.
Got it. The space bar didn't work. Here.
That's okay. David.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
Javier.
Here.
Namdi.
Here.
Michael is not here. Josie.
Here.
Awesome. Cynthia. It's gonna be a little late, I think. Carol.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
And Elizabeth is not yet here. Okay, thank you all.
So we have hit quorum, so we're good to go on that front.
Minutes forthcoming.
All right, so I was going to say, we didn't get minutes yet.
That part.
All right, so we don't have minutes, so we can't approve those. So we'll table that until next meeting, and we can approve those minutes along with the ones from this week. The next order of business is a 15-minute public comment period. So just like we have in the past, we'll ask people to use the raise hand feature to indicate that they would like to have a public comment. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. If you go over that, I'll interrupt you. If you do not use up all your time, that's fine. You can just let us know you'd like to pass that time when you finish your last sentence. To use the raise hand feature, you want to select raise reactions and then select raise hand. If you can't raise your hand, you can always send myself or Noah a message, and we'll make sure that you're put into the queue. Right now, it looks like there's only one person with their hand raised, Robert Eastman.
I was wondering if I could donate my 3 minutes to add on to Nan's presentation today for a little more time.
I mean, if there's no objection to that. Anybody have strong feelings about it? All right, then sure. I mean, as long as, I mean, our main concern was getting the 10-minute presentation and 10-minute question and answer and public comment. So are there any other public comments? All right, so I'm not seeing any. So at this point, we'll move on to the presentation from Northampton Abolition Now. Do we know who's representing Northampton Abolition Now tonight?
Hi, Dan. So that'll be myself, Ashwin, Yaping, and Rai. And I will, if I can share my screen, it looks like I'm able to, I'll be advancing the slides.
All right, perfect.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Oops. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can see that.
Yep, you're good to go.
Cool. Beautiful. All right, so we, hold on 1 second. Just a second here. There we go. Okay. All right, starting over. Can you still see, can you see the presentation?
You're in the editing mode right now.
Really?
Yeah.
What about now?
There we go.
Okay, awesome, cool. So we've got 10 minutes and you've heard from us before, so we'll skip the introductions. And we're hoping to surface the voices of expert organizers and testimonials of impacted people to really reinforce these 3 points that we hope will be helpful as you write your report. And we're gonna start by hearing from Andrea Ritchie, who is a Black lesbian immigrant whose research, litigation, and organizing and policy advocacy has focused on policing and criminalization of women and LGBT people of color. So I'm going to play a clip from her that I think is really relevant to your work here. And the question she's responding to is talking about the need to experiment and take risks to develop strategies for safety that would make policing obsolete, while also showing how demanding defunding takes risks to invest in things that would make all of the alternatives that you all have been researching possible. All right, so I'm going to hit play now on her response to that question.
Yeah, what we were getting at is that, people are trying to frame it as if there's like two schools of thought, right? That like there's definitely research out there that shows the best violence prevention strategy, if we're talking about domestic violence or other forms of violence, is access to safe, affordable, accessible housing. And and living wage, fulfilling employment, and education, and cultural programs and youth engagement programs. There's research that shows that these are the things that actually make us safer. And that in this moment, when we're in the biggest economic crisis of our generation, people are facing a looming eviction crisis, like just more unemployed people than in my lifetime, or most people who are still alive right now's lifetime. Just people, more food insecurity, like giant lines at food banks every day. Like we are in an economic pressure cooker, and then on top of that, there's a deadly virus that's like killing people in our families, in our communities, and our neighbors, and like decimating and devastating. And I think we need to focus on the deaths because there's astronomical, but also there's like the long-term disability of people who had COVID and are still recovering or still disabled by it. And then all of us trying to plus parents trying to homeschool kids, and kids trying to being like, oh my God, I never spent this much time in my house, and my house is a violent place, and now I'm stuck in it. And so like there's so much pressure cooker going on right now in terms of economic conditions and pandemic conditions, and in some places climate conditions, and all the conditions that the previous administration like exacerbated, that the pressure cooker, it amps up the violence. And then people are like, oh my God, rates of violence are going up, and domestic violence going up, and gun violence is going up. It's like, oh my God, have you looked at the pressure cooker we're living under? Like people are like, earlier today, there was people like yelling at each other at the top of the lungs on my street. And I, popped my head out the window just to make sure the cops weren't there. And if they were, I'd go cop watch. But people are just hot. Like, it's just stressful. Like, and stress produces stressful responses, right? And so there's definitely evidence that if you alleviate that stress, if you take off the stress, if you make it possible for people to leave a place that's not safe, if you make it possible for people to earn money in work that is, safe and not risking their lives every day, et cetera, that violence rates go down. And the fact is, we live in a patriarchal society. We live in a homophobic, transphobic, ableist, xenophobic society. And violence occurs, and it will continue even under ideal economic conditions, because systems of power and privilege and systemic structures that support them continue to exist. So we have to make sure that we find ways to address that violence. The problem is that all the ways that we address that violence now just reinforce those structures, right? And so well, that's not true. All the ways that are funded to address the violence now reinforce those structures. There are many ways people are addressing violence in communities that don't reinforce those structures and are liberatory. They're just not funded, and they're not validated, unless, as you're saying, Kim, that you can prove through your evidence-based study that, your neighborhood block association, rapid response to each other's crises is like working on a peer.
Or it works in every situation.
Exactly.
Like I could possibly come up with hypothetically.
Exactly. All the time. Never make a mistake. Never make a mistake. Out there making mistakes all day, every day, killing people, beating people, arresting the wrong person.
Yeah.
But we know your thing must be perfect. Your community-based thing.
And the thing that we don't, unlike the police department, we don't have, we don't have fully funded academic departments that are studying these issues, right? And
or a whole propaganda machine.
Criminal justice departments that are doing their thing over there, and cop academies and whatever.
Exactly.
All right, so we're going to leave it there. We think that that reflects a lot on conversations that we've been having and that you all have been having in this commission. So Yaping, do you want to tee up this next clip that we're going to play?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, they just said we can go right into, these are two other movement leaders who we've learned a lot from, and they're going to make a segue between systemic issues and also how that applies to Northampton.
Great.
You have a clear sense of that. I also think that decision making is really important, because the people who have the most power, who often get off on all your stops, it turns out, are quick to make decisions. And I think that it's important that you have a clarity around that too. So that's just like coalition advice from someone who has like coalition scars.
Ashwin, this is, sorry, a different clip. Could you pause it? I think it's a different time. Apologies, we're at the wrong part in.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a few minutes before that.
Do you have a timestamp for me?
I think 49.
49?
About 40, let me check. Let's see. Actually 47 minutes and 49 seconds in. 47 minutes and 49 seconds, yeah.
Got it. All right, going. Oh no, what happened?
Sorry, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us.
I think so.
No, why did that happen? Spacebar doesn't do what it usually does when you're in presenter mode.
You have a clear sense of that. I also think that this is my favorite. I think.
All right, 47:48, let's go.
Yeah, that works.
Someone from Families for Freedom, which is a dope organization out of New York, said this. But they said, like, you know, there are places actually all over this country that are abolitionists in the sense that they don't have police officers. The Hamptons, the Upper West Side, Beverly Hills, like there are places you can go where people live without police. At least the neighborhoods that I live in primarily have police occupation every place, right? There are police spotlights, there are police in every corner in the summertime. You can't get on the subway without there being 3 police with big ass guns. That's not true in the Hamptons. You don't see police in the Hamptons. They don't bother nobody. People use drugs, use sex work, all the things, beat their wives, and like all of that happens in the Hamptons as well. And yet police are not part of the visible landscape of that. And so it's not as if a police-free world is outside of our imagination. It's just that because police have for so long been used, in fact, were invented by slave patrols in the South and to suppress unionization in the North. They were created to police and patrol and to subject and to oppress Black, brown, and poor communities. They still do that. They leave rich people alone. And so I think we should be clear on that too, that as Rachel said, it's not a natural feature of our landscape. And for lots of folks, it is still not a feature of their landscape. And yet it's a major investment of most cities. And so for instance, Oakland spends 40% of its general budget to fund the police, right? But
can I say something about Beverly Hills?
Yes, that might be a bad example.
Or the Hamptons.
That is
or the Upper West Side, which is that the residents there may not use police, but if you or I show up and just stroll around, the cops will come. It's not that the cops are not there. It's that they're put to different purpose, right? So I'm not trying to contradict you. I'm just trying to add a layer there.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And that, I mean, the police mostly at this point, at least in New York, so like more than 90% of all like crimes quoted in New York are like crimes of turnstile jumping, of drug use, of like lifestyle things. And so they are there also to protect the.
All right. So, oops. Cool, Yaping, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so this is an excerpt from an article from the Valley Advocate in 2015 that illustrates a little bit about how things might play out in Northampton, or one aspect of policing in Northampton. I'll read the first quote and then Rye will read the second part. So, we do routinely drive through lots of places, Casper said. Some people like to see an officer drive through their neighborhood because it offers a sense of safety. Okay, Rye, do you want to take over?
Residents of Northampton's Hampshire Heights said the neighborhood is no stranger to visits from the police. I don't think you're going to get much positive response from the people in here, said Andrews, as I take a stroll through the neighborhood asking for thoughts on NPD. Do the police come through here a lot? Andrews looks at his watch in response. Is it 8 o'clock yet? His girlfriend, Toni Dolan, 33, who lives next door, said her children are scared of the police. She said officers are often responding to calls, but also frequently prowl the neighborhood for signs of trouble. Dolan's daughter, Kara Badillo, 16, heard us talking and came outside to join in. Badillo said looking out her window night after night and seeing police cruisers is oppressive. To them, everyone is the aggressor, she said. They make me feel uncomfortable. I'm more scared of them than I am walking down the street in Springfield.
This is another stat from the same 2015 Valley Advocate article that the majority of arrests in Northampton, 66% are of people who are not Northampton residents, and 19% of those arrested in Northampton identify as homeless or transient. And so we feel like this is just an important statistic to keep in mind when thinking about who is policed in different areas and why, and how the effects of policing and incarceration in Northampton go beyond what a lot of Northampton residents might even be aware of. Okay, next slide. And so these are a series of testimonials. We don't have time to go through all of them, but they come through the Wildflower Alliance just from the last couple of months. We'll just read a few of them to help illustrate another group of people in Northampton who have to interface with police regularly in our current system.
ServiceNet called NoHo Police on me to be on standby because they were about to tell me some bad news. My best friend died at the group home and were worried about how I would take it. They wanted the police to be ready to take me to Cooley Hospital. Before I even heard the news, I saw the lights and 2 cruisers outside my window, so I was worried something was wrong and went downstairs to ask why the cops were there. That's when they told me my best friend was dead and that they were worried I'd kill myself upon hearing the news, and the cops were there to take me to the hospital.
I was dissociating. Knowing the police were coming, I grabbed a knife in 2 occasions and flopped down onto my bed. The police smashed down my door, took most of my hobby supplies, and aimed their guns at me and shouted. I went into a freeze response, holding the knife to myself. Another officer joined the 3 or 4 after a minute or 2. He said, "I'm sick of her shit and dealing with her and her knife." They pried away the knife with the baton and charged me with assault with a deadly weapon. My lawyer made me take a plea deal, as he said the cops lie under oath. The second incident, the officers talked gently and got me to lower the knife. I've since met with a representative from the NPD about such incidents.
I was not living in reality. The police had little idea what was going on. They said I was just an insane little girl. Even I was 18 years old at the time. They did not offer me any support whatsoever.
Just as a heads up, you guys have hit the time here. Do you want to wrap up real quick?
Yep, we can do that. So we can spend more time on this in Q&A, the specific point here about how this understanding of systemic issues in Northampton in particular leads us to this 50% call, because we know people have questions about that. But Yaping, can you just say a couple words about this quickly?
Sure. So basically the 50% call, it doesn't come out of nowhere for us. It comes at looking to other groups around the country, like the 2 groups in Seattle, Decriminalize Seattle, King County Equity Now, both called for 50%. Can you go to the next slide, Ashwin? And then at one point in the summer, 7 out of 9 Seattle City councilors even pledged to cut the Seattle Police Department by 50%. Here's some great quotes from folks we can send out later from city leaders. You go to the next slide, Ashwin. Okay, but that resulted, sorry, next slide. And that resulted in what came to be the 18% cut. So for us, thinking about the 50% number is both to be in alignment with other groups, and because given that on average police spend 4% of their time addressing calls having to do with violent crime, we do happen to think that 50% is actually a very doable and reasonable number if you take into account transfers out of the police department. But part of our strategy and choosing 50% also has to do with looking at how other cities landed on substantial cuts. And if you go to the next slide, Ashwin. Sorry, next slide again. That's about how great the cuts are and what things they funded. But and this is from Austin. And so the group in Austin was also pushing Austin for 50%, which actually landed Austin on a 1/3 budget cut. And you can go forward, Ashwin, to the next slide. And one more, that's about the hotels that Austin was able to buy with the police budget cut, not Ashwin. And this is about the Oakland City Council committing to cutting the police budget by 1/2, and that was even the city council, not, we believe there were groups on the ground, but city council pledged to do 50%. And next slide. And this is their task force, which started off with the goal of a 50% reduction. And can you go to next slide, Ashwin? And this is about Berkeley also setting a goal for 50%. And that can wrap us up for now, since we're already going over.
Cool. So yeah, let's move into questions. We're happy to talk about any of this stuff, but the bottom line there is that alternatives to policing haven't been funded. We have a great opportunity to fund them here. If you want bold change, you have to ask for even bolder things, and 50% empirically seems to be the thing that gets us there. All right, so I'll stop sharing my screen and we can talk.
So to start us off, do commissioners have any questions? Booker?
So thank you for the presentation. And I'm sorry it had to be time compressed. Lemmy did a really nice presentation for my faith community on Friday, and she actually had 45 minutes and she needed the whole 45 minutes to really develop the ideas. I wish you had that kind of time to do it. Am I right in all the cities that have done this so far that when they put up the amount that they said, here's what we're going to defund, the decision of where the money went actually occurred after the defunding decision was made? That it was not part of the initial proposal?
My sense is that I don't actually know all the details, but for Seattle, my sense was they passed a whole solidarity budget. And so it was passed at once as a package. And my sense with Austin is that they had a reimagining safety fund that was set aside. And then there were transfers decided ahead of time. And then there was some amount of money, I forgot whether it was 6 million or 20 million, that was also set aside specifically for violence prevention programs at the time. So my sense is that other cities have actually been successful in getting the reallocations right up front. And that's been what they've been pushing for. And the Northampton's sort of an anomaly.
Great, thank you. And David?
Yeah, thank you, guys. I have a sort of a long-winded question here, which I'm not sure there's an answer to, but I want to preface it by saying that as many of you know, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 40 years, and I'm almost entirely doing criminal defense and civil rights work. For the first 25 years, I had a very low income practice in Springfield. I represented mostly Black and brown people, not totally, but that was probably, 2/3 of my clientele. And the question I have, I know one answer to, but I'm looking for thoughts that some of you may have, and it's based around this scenario. And again, I'm sorry for being so long-winded, but during those 20-some years, I can remember moments, one moment in particular that I'll just never forget. It was a client of mine, a young Jamaican-American guy, sitting in my office and sobbing and saying, "Mr. Hoos, I can't walk out my door. I can't walk 50 yards down the street without the police stopping me and harassing me. I can't take it anymore." I have no doubt that what that young man was true, and I'll spare you the advice that I gave him. I had some specific advice. I heard many stories like that. It's just that one sticks in my mind. But I also heard stories, and I'll interject here, that in addition to my practice, I lived in a predominantly African-American community in Springfield for about 8.5 years. During that time, I was on the executive board of the NAACP. So I had a lot of interaction with the Black community in Springfield, and to a lesser extent with the Hispanic community in Springfield. So the other side of what I would hear is that, where are the police in our neighborhood? We have gangs, we have drugs. Why aren't they doing something about it? So when I hear the stories about, the police are all in the wealthy neighborhoods, or they're not in the wealthy neighborhoods. They're here and oppressing us. I've heard that side of the story, but I've also heard the flip side. I've heard mothers say, these kids are out here on the corner, they're dealing drugs, they're in gangs. Where's the police? They let them do it. So I know what your answer is to that. Part of what your answer is to that. It's the same as mine. Well, if we invested in our communities, we wouldn't have a problem with gangs. Everybody in this group knows by now that if it was up to me, we would legalize drugs tomorrow. So that wouldn't be an issue either. But beyond that, I'm curious as to what your guys' response is to those mothers who say, my kid's not safe here.
I think on a basic level, my first response is to use the words of Miriam Kaba that, policing isn't broken. Policing is working exactly as it's supposed to. Police isn't meant to protect Black and brown families. It's not meant to serve that mother who's wondering where the police are. And I'm sure some of my colleagues can answer much better. But I think the answer is that's how policing has been designed.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer to that question. And the other piece of it, I think, is what are these mothers asking for? They're not asking for kids to be taken away, beaten up, incarcerated, and have their lives ruined. They're asking for their communities to be safe. And for decades, the growing answer, the answer that we have funded, that we've put tons and tons of money into, the answer that we have shown on TV and in movies as the only thing that's out there, the only game in town, is policing. So it makes sense that in the absence of any positive alternative that's been supported by the community that could fill in these gaps, that people would see a problem and think about policing as the only problem, as the only solution. But we know empirically, of course, that policing doesn't solve these problems, right? It actually doesn't do a good job of keeping these communities safe. And what that means is that we have a great opportunity here to show that there are these alternatives, to allow room for these alternatives to breathe, to allow them to really flourish on the stage that they deserve. So that would really be my answer to that question, is that once we start funding alternatives, people will think about how their problems can be solved in different ways, and I think in beautiful ways.
All right, Alex?
Thank you all for the presentation and actually for all the things that you've sent and the reports. There's so much from that I think we can take and use, and I really appreciate that work. Also just say that, it's not in Meadowbrook Apartments. In my ward, I certainly hear the comments about where are the police. So just to know that there are people, Black and brown people in Northampton who also have that perspective. But I also understand the needs that, if they did somehow do a raid and take away all the drugs, that wouldn't actually reduce the supply of drugs at all. So just a note there. But so I think, a 50% cut doesn't allow for the time to implement alternatives. I know last year when the council approved the 10% budget cut, I made a judgment that was a figure that would not imperil safety. And I think that is shown to be accurate. But there will be simultaneous safety events that require a response, armed or not. And we won't have that alternative response in place if such a cut happened on such short notice. So to me, it kind of sounds like 50% is a start point for negotiations that I'm hearing, but and I have a hard time I think as activists, I think that's a good place to be, but I have a hard time because I, as answerable to my constituents, to say, okay, if this happened on July 1st, this would be a safer and better Northampton. And so that's something that we would have to justify. And so that's kind of what's going through my mind now. And would just appreciate hearing your thoughts on that, and also just to express that, a phased approach is one that I feel much more confident in recommending.
Can I try to take a stab at that, and then maybe one of you can add in? So thank you for sharing that insight from your constituents. That's really important, and we want to center constituents in our decision making. And I think the good news is that since only 4% of what the Northampton Police Department does involves quote unquote violent crime, they could easily handle that with a 50% cut. I personally believe that a 50% cut is a desirable short-term objective and not just a sort of strategic bargaining chip to get to something else. And I think that given what we know about how the Northampton Police Department operates and what they actually spend their time and resources doing, even though I would like to take policing and weapons out of even these equations, even these situations that we might consider violent, that they would still be able to basically continue all of those functions with a 50% cut. And there's no evidence to suggest that that's not the case. So you can tell your constituents safely and be very confident that you're right, that these edge cases that they are concerned about, because the edge cases are scary, would not be impacted materially by a 50% cut. So that's the good news. And then I think the more important sort of second point, though, is that we really need that money in order to fund the alternatives. The alternatives won't work and won't prove themselves to work without serious investment, right? And given the way that municipal budgeting works, there ain't a lot of revenue to be raised in town, right? Prop 2.5 exceptions are kind of the new normal right now, given that we're in a pandemic crisis. But there's a limit to how much we can actually do with that. So I think that the sort of most moral and strategic thing to do is to reduce the excesses of policing, to reduce their sort of footprint that causes the sort of bad testimonials that we're seeing arise, right? To stop those contacts in the first place by reducing the budget, and also funding alternatives that can fill in the gaps and start to roll out and expand with funding and the sort of overall support of the community. So to me, that seems like a really good mix. And I think you can tell constituents that it would keep them safe too. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add that, I mean, I've heard several commissioners pinpoint this in commission meetings, that the money wouldn't be disappearing, it wouldn't be getting cut, it would be transferring that money to different people who are better able to handle the same situations. A clip we didn't get to play, but that we'll send out, is of Ruth Wilson Gilmore talking about these alternatives, and also focusing in on that it's really about political will. And I think this is a case where if the political will is there in Northampton, then those changes and transfers can be made, but that means we need to, actually demand and call for bigger changes faster than maybe the pace of bureaucracy that we're used to. But I think the possibilities are there if people committed to actually wanting to rearrange all of those services, so that the safety services, and the woman that talked about her neighbor's pipe bursting the other day, or the woman who talked about getting attacked by dogs on the bike path, so that to ensure that those functions would still be fulfilled by someone else who hasn't been trained in the police.
All right, so we actually just hit the 10 minutes. I'm gonna stop that alarm from going off for Q&A. So I guess we'll round it out with Josie.
Sure. My question is really just a quick question, which is, when I have these conversations about abolition with other people and with other people in the community, a lot of like the pushback I get is this idea that, cutting the budget of the police will lead to less services or less safety. And, I guess I wanted to just really quickly get your perspective on like why abolition, though a scary word, doesn't actually lead to those outcomes.
Alex, did you want to respond to that before?
If it's okay, just a question, just to say that I think I need further data Um, and maybe we can talk about gathering that data. 'Cause Ashwin, you referenced that. So just to say, around, as of, on July 15th, there's a traffic accident here, there's a violence incident here, and we don't have the people who are the alternatives in place, so I need more data that and those staffing levels will work. So, but we can talk about that some other time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main point is that it's not going to be nothing is going to be outright. Nothing that people value or need, things like traffic assistance, are going to be deleted, right? We're going to be really careful to maintain functions that we don't have a way to replace and to shift other functions into places that can perform them better, right? So the bottom line is that there's just so much excess spending in policing that doesn't do what people think it does and doesn't really keep them safe. And that means that we have a big opportunity. Yaping, did you want to?
Oh yeah, and just for perspective, again, thinking about the trend of social services and community needs being defunded over the last 50 years drastically as police spending has gone and prison spending has gone up exponentially, that even just 10 years ago, the police budget was 40% less than it is today in Northampton. And yeah, I think the historical perspective is important to keep in mind with these things.
Right. There's been this massive drive towards militarization and increased funding of police, and we've sort of tacitly accepted that as the new normal, even as we have seen federally and state and locally funding for schools and healthcare, parks get cut and cut and cut, right? So I think a lot of this is actually a trick of mental accounting and a little bit of fallacious reasoning that we all tend to commit to, these sort of fallacies of behavioral psychology that we know about, right? And in fact, we're anchored to this world, and our starting point in this world is this world that is incredibly over-policed, right? And there's even more recent historical precedents that are a lot different from that, and that we can imagine serving people's needs for public safety and also providing lots of other opportunities through public services. And we're trying to restore some of that and go ultimately way beyond it into something even better.
Okay, so we are pretty far over time, but I also see that Javier and Nick both want to say something. So I guess we'll do the last two, but keep them as brief as you can. Javier and then Nick.
Sure, I'm gonna contribute to derail your agenda. Two things. So three things. The first one, can you hear me well? Yeah. So the first one, I think. This is not a question, and just listening to everybody talking, and a couple of three things. The first one is we have talked several times how, if whoever receives the call, if that's a new department is created, that the dispatcher 911, whatever it is, will dispatch to the appropriate one. And I think we have a right to a conclusion about the specific situations where a gun is not needed, right? And for those who were not in alternative meeting with Police Chief Casper, she said that the most highly trained people are the dispatchers, so they would know really well about this. And those things that we are agreeing that police should not be involved, she is highly, positively agreeing with us. That's one. I think there is, and this is one of the things that the commission has not been able to do, which is share a common language and common knowledge. I don't think when we're talking about policing or safety, we're talking about the same thing. And I think that's a huge problem. And this is more for the commissioners. This is a problem more with the commissioners than a problem with the activists. And the third thing, we need to be careful falling into this almost monolithic way to see Black people, almost monolithic way to see brown people, right? I grew up extremely poor. I didn't know what the hell I was going to eat the next day. And if something happened, I want to call the police. As a poor person, I can tell you that that was my reaction because it was the only thing that was available. There was nothing else. If you ask me, if there was at that point something available that would not involve police, I would have default into that, of course. But that was not my reality. We need to understand that Black and brown people are not monolithic groups. They are a group of brown and Black people that the system has worked, and they function by that system, and they will defend that system. In the same way how you have white people that understand that this system is broken, and other white people that just want to prefer the system. Okay, so let's try not to use brown and black people as this monolithic group.
Okay. Not sure I heard a question in there, but we'll jump on to Nick, I guess.
Okay, I realize that you guys have, you're probably putting as much or more time into this as our commissioners, and it's very impressive, and it's very impressive, some of the data you're producing. I have one question at this point. Do you endorse or lean towards a particular alternative model that would, any particular model? Because we're seeing different models in cities, in different cities across the country. And I just, and as we know, each city has its specific character and needs. Northampton may be very different from some of these large metropolitan areas. Do you have a particular model that you guys have been thinking about? Thank you.
Should I? Okay. I would say overall, what we are proponents of is people who have been most impacted by the problem being at the helm of decision-making and leadership and having a say over their own lives and the services that affect them. So it seems like in terms of mobile crisis response, that would mean a peer-led model that I think Rachel Bromberg went through a number of ways that sort of plays out in terms of the decision-making and the staffing and the culture of an organization. And so for us, I think as long as those principles are there, and I think Rachel Bromberg also referred to principles, and I've heard Sean from the Wildflower Alliance reiterate principles of non-coercion and community-based models that really respect people's autonomy and well-being and sort of defer to, not sort of, really defer to the people who are on the receiving end of anything, to what do they want and what do they need and what works for them, and using that as the guiding principle. And all the other things seem like they can really vary based on the conditions of a place. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Yaping. And if any of you have a city example that you think would be something specific that's in line with what you're thinking, I'd be interested in it.
Can I just really quickly say also that, so yeah, I know, we're happy to continue to look into those things and try to produce even, support for how to actually implement this stuff. But just one thing that I think is really important to remember is that your recommendation can stem from a place of moral understanding and the sense of what is the right thing to do. And it can be up to the mayor and the council to figure out exactly how to implement it, right? So I think given the balance of evidence that we have, I hope you'll feel empowered to make a bold recommendation and say that the specifics need to be figured out according to these principles, right? And trust that that can come later to some degree.
Thank you very much. That makes sense.
If you don't mind, I'd love to jump in and add one thing as well. And I say this speaking as Rye Buckley, and not entirely as a member of NAN in this moment. And that's that I really hesitate to answer your question, Nick. Because I think the last thing this community needs is another white man and another person looks like me designing these systems and these solutions. And I've definitely been doing my best to ask and listen to the communities most impacted and the communities asking for change and trying to communicate their needs and desires to this commission. But in the end of the day, I don't want to answer that question. And I would love for you all to find those people and talk to those people and get the community's answer to that question and the broader community and the most impacted community. Yeah.
All right, David, I know you have your hand up, but we are also about double time at this point. So I think we need to move on. But if you'd like, I have the email for the Northampton Abolition Now. If you want to ask a question, we can send that to them. I think we all have that because they've emailed us all. But just to get a response. And I really hate to cut off the conversation, but I also did let things get off the rails a bit in terms of time. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Northampton Abolition Now. At this point, I do want to turn the floor back to public comment just because we did end early and there is someone with their hand raised. It's the phone number 413-582-7081. So at this point, if you would like to unmute yourself, please do so. You have 3 minutes to make your comment.
Yes, this is Hildegard Friedman of G68 in Cahill Apartments. I was at Fort Sander for several years, during which time there were no locks on the outside doors. People and drug distributors included could come through. And at that time, I reported someone who drowned that had a plate in his leg the day after he drowned, because there was someone knocking on his door for a couple of days. And I also reported a strange thing. I mean, it's not perhaps strange to the police, that I reported on the cell phone of collective copies or collectors' copies in downtown Florence on the main street. I had passed the side street of Fort Sander. I was living in a complex that had two sides of the street and the brick buildings, the condo style buildings. And a woman was standing on top of a car in a bathing suit, without much clothing on. And I thought immediately, this is sex trafficking and they're in and out of the building. And I reported it, and somehow I believe that Brendan McKinney checked on whether that call came through. He is a detective with the Northampton Police Department. But I never found out. He came to my apartment, which was, I believe I was in number 30 at the time. And he came to my apartment with Adam Van Buskirk, a beginning detective at that time, who was just starting. So I don't know what happened there, but I've been through two complexes here in government housing with lots and lots of drugs and lots, in my perception, of deaths. I don't know how many deaths each police city has, but it just seems like another death and another death, whether it's a suicide or a homicide. Okay, that's all I had to say. Thank you for the time.
All right, thank you very much. All right.
I am Hildegard Friedman, G68, Cahill.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which for us is a quick announcement of speakers. At this point, the only real announcement is that we are working to have both Jess Tilley's HRH 413 and Cherry Sullivan's Hampshire Hope to come and give short presentations to the commission as well, and to respond to questions. We're still working to schedule those. They will hopefully be within the next couple of weeks, and we'll announce as soon as they're confirmed.
Thank you so much.
Javier?
Tomorrow the alternative subcommittee's meeting 7 to 8:30, and we're gonna have the two co-directors of NELQUID. So if anybody from the rest of the commission wants to attend to that one.
All right, thank you. Nope, I muted myself. All right, so with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the discussion topic for the public hearing and meetings, public hearing and meetings with the chief debrief. And I'm going to also pass it over to Cynthia and recognize that I also used up a lot of extra time during that Q&A, so I apologize again.
Thank you, Dan. Maybe we can pick up some extra time on this topic, but we'll see how commissioners feel about that. We just wanted to carve out some time to have folks give opinions, reflections, questions on the public hearing, and also the two presentations, well, the two subcommittees that had the chief of police meeting last week. So would anyone like to comment on those two events? Any reactions, thoughts? Hey, Dan?
I mean, I'll just say that I think one of the things that I found interesting is that there's a lot more concern from people, both in the meeting, but also in the emails that we've gotten after. It seems like at least a couple a day come in where people are really concerned about who's going to keep them safe. And that goes from a lot of things that aren't necessarily law enforcement related, right? Like a lot of these things end up being, as the comments we heard, about plumbing issues, about dogs on the loose, about maintaining relationships with the school administrators and like across city departments and those sort of things that are not necessarily related to the police, but they are really related to community safety. And for me, at least, it's trying to think how to communicate that effectively, that there's a difference between safety and police, that there's a difference between when you might feel uncomfortable versus when you are unsafe. And thinking about ways to make that make sense to people and in a way that would be tolerable. And I'm not sure that I've effectively figured out a way to do that yet either. But that's where I'm thinking.
Thank you, Dan. Other reactions or thoughts to the hearing or the chief's presence? Josie, and then Namdi.
Yeah, sorry, my cell phone died, so my audio might be a little bit worse on the computer. But one kind of reflection I made during the open meeting was that a lot of the people who called in and spoke positively about the police gave, as Dan had pointed out, all of these instances of kind of community safety that could very well have been done by anyone who didn't have a firearm on hand. You know, whether it be the dog attack or the water pipes or feeling just slightly unsafe in an office building for it to turn out to be no one, or, you know, any number of the interactions that we see. And though I'm happy that those people have had positive kind of experiences in the community due to the infrastructure that we have currently, I know that those instances of safety, those instances of being heard, those instances of having the social programs necessary would not only, you know, benefit all members of this community, but would also happen more often if we divested from policing, invested into the community to continue servicing these people. And something that kind of really struck me aback by the open meeting was this idea that we are somehow going to be making the community less safe, or we're going to be taking away services that people really like the police currently doing. What we're really doing is shifting up responsibility to this other infrastructure, to these other programs that don't necessarily carry the same kind of societal stigma and ingrained white supremacy as the police have historically, and will benefit all members of our community. Ooh, and I can see on my internet, so when did that cut out?
Yeah, Josie, if you can hear us.
I realized my voice cut out at some point. I was trying to figure out where.
Yeah, so you were a little scratchy.
Yeah,
and
I can.
But I think we got it. Are you finished? Or I don't know if Noah got it, but.
Yeah, I guess my biggest point is that, like, I really guess we should continue kind of enforce.
I'm sorry, Josie. Josie, it's not working. Maybe a disconnect and a reconnect, and we'll get back to you.
More of those positive directions. Just
sorry. Okay, I think Josie's off now. Maybe disconnect and reconnect and we can try it again. But we got your first section there. So Namdi and then Carol. Namdi?
Yeah, yes, hello. Yeah, so I was thinking that the conversation with our subcommittee had with the chief and listening to the presentation today, I was reminded again about the importance of, from my point of view, of our commission offering some kind of roadmap about, you know, how to deal with services that people currently expect the police to handle, that we now are envisioning someone else will handle. So again, one of the sort of the points made today was maybe we shouldn't need to worry about those details. Maybe we should just sort of say, you know, this is the direction we need to go and let others worry about the details. But, you know, we do have alternative subcommittees and others who have put a lot of time into articulating alternatives. So I think we should, and down to what, you know, I was very struck by Alex's question. I totally agree with it, with you know, kind of imagining shutting off the pipe or cutting 50% of the budget and then thinking about what do you do on day one with that budget cut. I think it's important to respond to people's sense of where they go, where should they go for the needs that they currently expect police. And I guess maybe what I should have said at the outset is that I was thinking also about Dan's recent comment and many of the public comments is a part of what we're wrestling with. And I think we should try to take seriously is everybody has a different notion about what safety means to them. And there are these, I guess it's been easy for several people in our commission, including myself, to take seriously the perspective of a family of color or who feels unsafe in the presence of an armed police officer, see someone with a gun and feels that they're less safe because that person is standing around them. And I think we're trying to, as a commission, take seriously that's a valid perspective to have, even if that person is saying that they've never personally been mistreated by that particular officer, or maybe they've never personally been mistreated by officers here in Northampton, but they see that there's a real problem in policing nationally, or have had other experiences in other settings and have reason to feel unsafe. So I guess I want to take all that seriously, but I feel like to be even-handed, it's important that when we hear from other community members that they feel very safe in the presence of an officer and feel very unsafe with the idea of officers being taken away, I think we need to be sympathetic to that point of view as well and try to offer people like that a vision of how they can continue to feel safe in their community. I mean, I don't think I think it's unfair to take the view that one person's subjective sense of unsafety is better and more privileged than anyone else's. So I sort of hear in our conversation a dismissal of, say, people who may be privileged or used to having a position of being able to rely on police and telling them, well, you know, you're exaggerating. You see danger where it doesn't exist. If we take that point of view, we can easily find ourselves pointing fingers at people of color who say that they find police officers threatening, and someone could say to them that they're exaggerating and misrepresenting what threat is. So I think we want to try to find a way to speak back to our community and listen to everybody's sense of what they need to feel safe, and how can we provide a relationship or presence of police that allows everybody in this community to have a sense that their safety needs are being addressed. So I guess that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Namdi. Carol?
Yes, just to build on that, I think there's the safety issue, which means a lot of things. It's code word to a lot of people for a lot of different needs and feelings. But the thing that I've been thinking about since last week's public hearing is that some of what I heard between the lines, that people have come over the decades to believe that there's a convenience factor in calling the police. You know, people have sort of gotten accustomed almost habitually to calling the police as a first response to a situation. And that what I came up with in my mind was sort of like, it's like in the old days, this is like too old a metaphor for some people on this screen who aren't old enough to have lived through it, but there were switchboard operators who used to sit and, you know, with a headset on and then a whole panel in front of them. And someone would call in and say, I need such and such. And they'd say, okay, we'll connect you with this. Oh, the dog officer, you have a problem on the bike path? Okay, dog officer. So, you know, we access the dog officer. And in fact, there was someone who gave testimony about how comforting it was to have the dog officer come out when she was feeling threatened by, I think it was 3 dogs on the bike path off leash. So what this makes me think about is, again, Namdi mentions speaking, we need to speak back to our community, and there's a range of feelings out there and professed needs for policing. I think, one of the things we need to talk about is how communities have gotten very hooked into just calling the police first instead of calling another resource. And it's not going to endanger them to get used to calling other resources for certain situations that do not involve criminal activity or violent action. And so that's one thought I had. The other thought, when listening to in our meeting with the alternative subcommittee, meeting with the chief, is that I really got a sense that the chief was willing to listen to offloading some of these types of dispatches and calls to other entities. And that was not that we need her permission, but to me, that was heartening. That she signaled, I think, through her body language, that it wasn't some of what we are anticipating recommending for was not seen as punitive. Although I have to say, at the end of our time with her Wednesday night, a discouraging piece was talking about the need for the professed needs to, when in uniform, have gun. And there was some interesting interaction around that. And I felt that she was quite confused. She wanted to have a response to some of our concerns about the necessity of guns for all these calls. And she really didn't have any, I didn't think, meaningful response on why it would be okay to have some of the calls without a gun.
Thank you, Carol. Javier?
I think I'm having a problem with my audio. Can you hear me well?
Javier, you just
No,
muted.
not now you're muted.
Yep.
My system is not working well. Yeah, I appreciate in the last round of public comments that we had, specifically for that we started getting a more diverse pool of people. Sadly, we're getting a more diverse pool of people from people that that the system has worked for, right? And I want to push back a little bit in what Namdi said about the equivalency, almost equal, between people who says positive things and people who has negative things, because a lot of what I'm hearing in the commission still does not, it's almost as if those opinions are not embedded into the understanding that we live in a system of oppression in a white supremacist system, and how the system is set up is for white people to have good experience, and that's working really well, right? And for people of color to have suck experiences. And that's one of the reasons why we have the rate of people of color imprisoned right now. It's literally that, right? So I want to push back into I understand that people for whom the system has worked, it's really afraid of changing anything. And I'm talking about people of color and white people that the system has worked, right? This is the system that has worked. Why we're gonna change it? And I think that's a challenge for us, because most of the things and most of the concerns that they have voiced, the answer is, if you call and you need a cop in what so far looks like we're gonna recommend, you're still are gonna get a cop. If I'm wrong, I would like somebody here to correct me, but so far that's what we have talked about, right? and I think that many of the comments that we're getting for the white folks who talk highly positive from the police department, that I'm not ignoring their experience, but I feel there is a valid equivalency to talk about their experience and experience of oppressed communities and communities of color in the same way. They are not in the same way at all. And I want to be really clear with that. So, and I think that's a challenge for us, because I would like everybody to be able to come every single meeting to see our thought process. One of the things that came out of the public hearing was that people are absolutely unaware of our thought process. And many times, what I feel is that how we can bring that thought process to the community that is afraid of the changes, so they would understand where we're coming from and what are the substantive changes that will happen and what's going to be affected. And I think that's one of the challenges that, at least for me, came out of the meeting.
Thank you, Javier. Dan, and we're 15 minutes in. So, Dan?
All right, I think this is I'm just going to say, I was going to echo most of what Javier had said in terms of it's that the system can work for some people for some times. And I think our concern is not, and I don't know how to translate this the right way, but to have it so that our concerns aren't we don't want to reduce the service level. We just want to make sure that the service level matches both what our values are and what people actually need, and that it's the same for everyone. And I mean, I want to push that it's not necessarily just about individual officers. It's about the entire system being structured in a way that allows these different access points, or that allows police to have different intervention points. And those are what lead to different outcomes. And so, like, just being conscious of the fact that this is a systemic problem. If we were going to tackle the whole thing, it'd need a giant systemic solution. I don't think that we have that power. I don't think we can go back in time or anything like that, but that we do have to be conscious of the fact that we still do live, as part of the history that we're still grappling with, and that leads to those different outcomes. That's all.
Thank you, Dan. I wanted to jump in because Javier, to your point, I'm thinking that I've talked to Dan about this a lot. Our next public hearing, if we had, and we're going to get to the consensus document, hopefully, if to let the community know that thought process and react to it specifically in the next public hearing might be beneficial, but it's something that we can all discuss about how that Saturday public hearing is going to go. Any more thoughts on this topic? Because it would be great to jump into the consensus document, or points of consensus, I'm sorry. Okay, seeing none, if that's okay with everyone to move on, because we have some time left. Dan, you were the technical person on how to make all this work and happen. So I so appreciate you telling us how to do it, but I also want to introduce the fact that this is broad consensus as opposed to wordsmithing time. And maybe there's too many words in some items, as some folks have pointed out. NAMD submitted a revision to the first item that caused some conversation, and we may want to go back to the first item, but we're just want to get putting our toe in the water and testing the temperature. So Dan, would you mind explaining how we're going to do this? Thank you.
Yeah. You all should have gotten an email from me earlier this afternoon that said, do not fill out this poll until we're in the meeting. So we're going to do a live poll. I'm going to share my screen so all of the results will be there. Noah is also going to be sending you a link in the chat as well if you don't have that, that email up. But it's essentially each of those statements that were on the document, and there are 3 options for each one. So it's red light, green light, green light, yellow light, red light. So when you're indicating sort of your agreement or disagreement with something, we're going to use a scale. Green light, totally fine, nothing to change. You feel 100% behind it. Yellow light is, ooh, I might want to change something, or maybe we need to circle back to this a little bit, but you're on board with it at the moment. And then a red light is like, ooh, we really need to talk about this. That you have concerns about those things. So as you're going through, really quickly check those off. I think I don't want to speak too much to how Cynthia wants to do this, but I think we had talked about really focusing on the red lights at the moment. Those are like the major causes of concern. And it's okay to disagree with things. And again, reminding everyone that this is not anonymous. It does ask for your email there so that we can trace it back. But we should be good to go. Do folks all have that link?
So we just select it and send it?
Yep, so you just keep on selecting through, and at the very bottom is a submit button once you've done all of them. And I'm going to start sharing my screen here, where we have our responses so far. So we have Alex's responses and Booker's coming through. Is everyone able to access that? Do I need to do any sort of troubleshooting?
Maybe just a few more seconds.
Dan, are you wanting us to do all of them right now?
Yep. And hopefully we'll have a lot of consensus here, so we won't have to spend time on each and every one. That's the goal here. And actually, I suppose I should do these as well. I'm sorry, everybody. Oh, right. I need to open this in a new link.
Dan, am I correct in only seeing 4 so far?
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm viewing this properly.
Yep. I think it's just taking a little time to go through them. There are.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm cheating. Looking.
Yeah, no, that's good. So are all you're just cataloging the red ones?
So it's not even actually disconcertingly, but the color palette that Google chose for the results, blue is the green light, red is the yellow light, and yellow is the red light.
Oh boy. Of course.
Actually. So at least in this instance, yellow is the bad, or this orangey yellow color is like where we need to stop and have that conversation. The rest we can sort of touch on.
Okay, so far I'm not seeing any orangey red lights. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Through right now, and we
Dan,
have 7.
Can you go up to see the one submitted, because I did mine, but I don't know if it went through. Yes.
Yep, it did.
Thank you.
And I think we also No, did we lose anybody? We saw 1, 2, 3.
2, 3, 4, 5.
So we're still looking for 11.
By the way, thank you so much for all the work that you and Cynthia then are putting on this. This is this is really, really good to give us sort of a way to be able to work all these different issues.
Dan is the master at all things forms in Google.
All right. Are we
Not quite there. I'm looking for 2 more, I think. Does everyone see their emails up there, their names up there?
I think we're just waiting. Namdi is the last one.
Okay.
Right. We have 11. So look really quickly. I'm just going to scroll through.
Mhm.
That's oh, we got a couple of 100%, which is good.
Whoa, hey, here we go, jackpot.
So we have that one. We also have that one. So we've got a couple that we might want to talk about.
Yeah, could we tackle the yellows first, which are really the reds? If I'm interpreting your your code correctly.
Yep.
Does that sound good, Dan, to you?
Yeah.
So we have, and I'm sorry, can you scroll down just a little bit so I can see the next one? Okay, so they're both kind of evenly matched here. Individual diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-bias training cannot overcome the institutional history and systemic inequalities that exist in the NPD and institutions of policing. Any comments about how that could be changed? Is it wrong? Strong feelings? None? Or I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Namdi, then Alex? Is it Namdi? Did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
yeah, sorry, when Alex can go first though.
Okay, Alex?
Okay, I was a yellow light on this one. Let me see my response. So I think that, while we continue to, I put a yes, but while we continue to have policing, and I think we probably will for a long time, especially for the few events that need an armed response, I think it's worth considering who does policing. So people of color and women, for example, have a different approach to policing that appears to lead to better outcomes based on some data. And also, since training will continue to occur, it is worth considering what the best training is. So that was just kind of a footnote on that.
So Alex, just so I'm clear, you were a yellow based on the instructions with some reservations, right? You weren't completely nixing it. This
right.
particular.
I was a yellow light.
All right.
Yes. No.
Okay. Good. Okay. Just want to make sure.
But I would love to hear from the red light person who I think can we see what people's responses are as well if we click through?
I think we have to be able to see that because it's an open meeting, so I'm not sure.
So I might have been a red light on that one.
Okay, now yes.
And I think that my concern with this one, again, the naming of the Northampton Police Department in this, I don't know that we have data, the kind of data that I would think would show what's claimed there. So I think we could talk about systemic bias in policing nationally. I don't think we need to say nationally, but we could talk about it more broadly. And I'd be more in favor of that statement. And of course, I guess the other part of it is that I've always had a bone to pick with the claim that training cannot work and cannot make a difference in overcoming historical problems. Like, I will concede that it has failed repeatedly and has failed in many situations. So I think there's a little bit of tweaking in not naming the Northampton Police and not claiming that it can never work and will never work. And I think Alex's point is well taken, that coming back to what I've said many times, we will need to envision a police department in the short term that will be very similar to what we currently have. So to say that training and all this stuff doesn't matter at all could have a perverse impact of stopping any current training or not even seeking to do training better. So even though we see the training has limitations, I concede that. But I do think that phrasing it that strongly is not as helpful as it could be. But those are my two concerns with it.
Okay. Thank you, Nnamdi. And Josie?
Yeah, I'm on my phone again, so I shouldn't really have audio problems now.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think that, we're charged with kind of talking about the Northampton Police Department. I think it wouldn't be outside the realm to have it targeted at the Northampton Police Department. Not only that, I mean, to say that any one individual or any institution has fully overcome racism, sexism, transphobia, all these things, I think would be a really outlandish claim. I think that we all kind of, as humans, adapt to our environment, adapt to the society in which we, encompass and live within. And even though I am a Hispanic individual, there's definitely like Hispanic rhetoric that I've kind of internalized. And I think the same can be said with the Northampton Police Department and the people within them, and not just from a systemic lens, and that this is something that takes an entire lifetime to unlearn, to undo, like my inherent sexism, my inherent anti-Blackness, right? And so I think that saying that it cannot overcome completely, I think is a very realistic thing to say. To think that any, amount of small trainings that police officers come across will instantly cure them of all racism, I think is a ludicrous kind of thing to say that it could never happen, because I think it can never happen. I think it's something that you will be doing throughout your whole life, because there's no way within the lifespan of one human existence that we will experience every level where that racism might take place or that sexism might take place. So I do think that, these trainings will never overcome that issue. They can mitigate them, but I think it's fine to say that they'll never ever overcome them.
Thank you, Josie. Booker and Dan, I'm sorry, it might have been in reverse order, but I didn't see it. So Booker and Dan.
So, by the way, I think in my heart of hearts, the data is anti-bias training doesn't work. However, I go to a lot of anti-bias stuff, and if I go in a mood of acceptance and willingness to change, it's been very efficacious. And there are certain people who talk with me about abolitionism 3 years ago that I was ready to throw them out on the street and almost came to fisticuffs around it. Now I have a totally different view about it. So I think this gets into openness. However, and I guess we should watch the tape again. When we talked with Jody Casper about this, she did not make me feel that the training that the Northampton Police Department does has been that efficacious. And she sort of suggested it's sort of where the people are who are about to do it. So that's why I went to a green light on this. I think 6 months ago, I might have been in a yellow light about it, but I've got to say, the more I've read about it, the more I've thought about it, that's why I'm greenish on this. But I think we ought to look at the tape of how Jody Casper talked about this. And I think it's really hard. There's a lot of data that shows that this doesn't work.
Thank you, Booker. Dan, then Carol?
Yeah, I think my part, I was obviously a green light on this because I'm the one that wrote it. But I'll also say there's two different parts of this, and I guess I could have phrased this better. So the one, I'm not convinced that training does work. Maybe there's a particular training that does really great things. But even with the ABLE training, the folk at UMass were developing and sent in to us as a recommendation, when I said, oh, let's talk about that. Like, how is that effective? How do you measure it? How do you know? And the response was, well, we don't actually know. There was one study done in 2015. It was only done as part of the pilot. So like, I really want to understand, what does work. If there's something that's magic and it does do this work, I think that's great. The part that I'm concerned about is that these things do, as Josie already mentioned, it takes a lifetime of commitment to do. And individual training isn't a lifetime commitment. The other thing that I think is important in here is that no one individual training for an officer, or maybe even a training for a dozen officers, it doesn't change the process and the institution itself. And that's one of the things that I continually go back to, is that you can have an entire department of amazing, really committed people, but if the policies and the structures that they have to sort of inhabit don't allow them to sort of be what they practice, it doesn't overcome the history, right? That's the part that I was sort of getting at, is that there's no Superman that swoops in, and solves the problem. So I think maybe this could be phrased in a different way, in a better way. But that was what I was trying to get at.
Thank you, Jen. Carol, then Nick, and Booker, are you still in the mix here? Oh, okay. Carol.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said, and I think I think it's an important statement to keep in some form, and I agree with comments about lifetime of growing awareness about how structural inequalities have affected the treatment of large segments of the population. I know we're not going to sit here and wordsmith these statements, but I'm just wondering if something like individual diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-bias training alone cannot overcome institutional history and systemic inequalities that exist in institutions of policing, and just keep the targeting the NPD out of there. So somewhere I would hope that statement in some form can stay in, because I think not to include it is omitting something that I think we have a lot of consensus about within this group already.
Thank you, Carol. Nick.
I'm reading Alex's comment right now. The problem I have with this, I was a yellow. The problem I have with it is it's a all or nothing statement. And I wouldn't want to stop all trainings. I wouldn't want to stop exploring trainings. I've taken trainings that made a difference for me. And if we can find what are the better trainings, I can tell you in mental health, I know there's some better trainings and worse trainings, and there could be even better trainings. So I just wouldn't want this to be misunderstood that we're opposed to training. I mean, I think that it still needs to be explored, and I like the way Alex put it.
Javier, were you up? Hand up again? Okay, and Dan, you were hand up again.
Yeah, I can stop and we'll go on.
Yeah, well, and maybe also Alex might want to give us his summary of what he put in the chat, but Javier.
Yeah, I didn't have it before up, so can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was agreeing on this one, and there are two things that I'm listening, and how I read it. First one, I read it that as a recognition that the Northampton Police Department exists within a larger context, in a historical context. That's how I read it. And I think we agree on that. I think so. If not, I would like to be corrected that we do agree that the system of policing and how the system of policing works, in which the Northampton Police Department is embedded, and where the Northampton Police Department officers are being trained. Hopefully we agree on that, right? So that's the way how I read it. And second, I would advise against a false equivalency of, well, you know, I don't know, I'm a teacher and I go to teacher training and that training works. So why not the police training works? Probably does. It's the same. It's not the same. It is not the same. The culture of policing, the militarization of policing is embedded. So I think it's a false equivalency to try to argue that X or Y profession has trainings and those training works. So by default, why sometimes there may be a training for a police department that works. That's a false equivalency because none of the other professions mentioned so far fall into a progressive and systematic militarization of a system.
Thank you, Javier. Dan?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think one of the things that we can do is adjust the wording because I don't think, at least for me, I didn't mean that don't try any training. It just meant this isn't the salvation, that this can't be the solution, that even if we, you know, among all of the things that we might recommend, if we recommend a particular training like ABLE training or any of the other anti-bias trainings, any of the trainings that the chief mentioned to move away from the warrior mindset to the guardian mindset, you know, that she's combating. And that's a reference, you know, to what Javier was talking about in terms of like the police seeing themselves as like warriors going out into a community. I think the thing for me is show that they work in some way. And then, yeah, sure, let's use them. And they won't, but like not to expect that it's going to be a, you know, 100% turnaround, you know, like some of the studies they looked at, you know, like the R squared for a lot of these things on like attitudes and stuff is really low. It's like 4, which is still significant in some way, right? Like it's better than 0, but, you know, it's not necessarily where we want to put all of our energy or where we see the most, you know, the most effect coming, right? Like the police are spending about $100,000 a year on training. Does that correlate to meaningful changes? Do the trainings that they have now warrant that much money? And I don't know the answer, right? That's something that we can come up with. My sense is no, not really. But again, I need to see anything that says, yes, they do work and here's how they work.
So Josie and then Nnamdi, it'd be great if, because you've heard until we get Josie again, all the comments. So maybe we can come up with some general direction for the rewording. Josie?
Yeah, I'll be quick. My last kind of point here on the trainings is that, you know, we have instances of, you know, Chief Casper talking to individuals in the community about how she has put, for example, anti-racist, anti-bias style literature in the police department's like leader part of their library, and how the response from our own Northampton Police Department was that they weren't in a learning mood. Now that is a you know, a solution. Reading literature on these topics is in and of itself a kind of step that doesn't cost the citizens of Northampton tax dollars for our police department to get better, to kind of address these internal biases, and they won't even participate in that like non-funded version of it. And so if they're not in a quote unquote learning mood, I don't see why we would continue to funnel money toward trainings that have also empirically not been as maybe worth it as, say, other initiatives, which is just something I want people to kind of think about.
Thank you, Josie. Nnamdi?
Yeah, so I'll be brief. I just want to be clear that, you know, I would be fine with endorsing this statement if the NPD was omitted from it and if it said something like training has not worked to solve these problems. So again, it is a wordsmithy kind of complaint, but it's a complaint that says we really don't have enough evidence to suggest, and though I take Javier's point, I agree that NPD exists in a larger world context, but I do think phrasing it this way is going to we're not holding the receipts to kind of back up of specific racial problems in the Northampton Police Department. And I think it's misleading to claim that we do have that. Our subcommittee spent all of its time investigating the Northampton Police Department and got criticized for doing so. And we did not come away with the sense that the Northampton Police has a uniquely sort of racial problem. But I think it's fine to say that, training has not worked to solve these problems in the past, or it's insufficient. That kind of thing I would be fine to support.
Thank you, Namdi. Dan, Josie, are you still, hand still up there? Okay, thank you. Dan, maybe we can rework this one based on the feedback, if that sounds good to folks. Thank you. And the one right below it, I think had some, I don't know now, is it red or is it yellow? But let's say the more negative, any below that one? I'm sorry, Dan, are you doing the pie chart there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it was 8. So it was just the breakdown of responses here. So it was 8.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Is that the training one?
No, this is the any transition of responsibilities.
Transition of responsibilities. Okay, thank you. So we had one individual who not so much, and maybe 2 want some more discussion. Transition of responsibilities or duties from one department to another should be accompanied by an equivalent transfer of funds from the department that held those responsibilities to the new one. Comments on that? So as I read it out loud, it's a little clunky. Am I missing a hand? Nick, I believe your hand is up. And
Well, I need to say this, I'm the red on this one.
Okay.
And I want to say this was added on. I haven't really read it that carefully, and I'm not sure whether I'm red or yellow. But to me, it brought up the question of funding. That there may be other funding sources. There may be there may be different funding needs as it's transferred. To me, it's just it's not a one-to-one equivalency. I need to look at this a little bit more. It's the first I'm looking at this. Was this added on to because I did not see this on the
no, it was there.
I see it. It is there. Okay. Yes, I have. I just don't see that it's necessarily a one-to-one. And also there are 880. There's a 10% cut already. There's $880,000 of funds, and I would need to hear more.
Well, I think if I could just talk to it a little bit, if we start this new Department of Community Care, I think our intention, or I think there's consensus on the fact that we want that 880 certainly accounted for and perhaps moved to this new department. But there could be some other items that will get moved from the police department, from NPD to this new department.
I'm willing to change to a yellow, Cynthia, if that. I'm definitely willing to listen to more on this. I don't feel it's a red for me.
I think it's a little. If I did it, I think I did, Dan. It's probably not worded very well, but let me just see here. Josie.
Yeah, so like one thing to consider is that the initial 10% cut that we've already seen, right? And if that money were to go to something like a warming center or some form of way to house the unhoused individuals, what we would see is we'd see a complete, or not a complete, but an equivalent drop off of phone calls to the police and actions by the police dealing with those individuals, right? And so if dealing with or interacting with the houseless population in Northampton was, for example, 10% of the things that the police did, and we removed that 10% and solved that issue with that money, then we would see an equivalent decrease, and I think the one-to-one is a pretty good model to go by. But also on top of that, something that we should consider, and something that we saw actually in the spending and contracts subcommittee, is that over the course of the last 10 years, Northampton has increased its police budget by 40%. And we don't know through what metrics or through what data or how incredible they warranted that increase of 40% over the last 10 years. I think it's really realistic for us to, cut the Northampton police budget by 40%, by that 40%, and bring it back to 2010 levels and see our community be just as safe as it was 10 years ago. I don't think there was a giant spike in crime to any degree. And yeah, there's probably more I could say about that, but I'm gonna see my time for now.
Okay. Thank you, Josie. Dan.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to muddy the waters or not, but one of the things thinking about this, $880,000 sounds like a lot, because in a lot of ways it is, but in a lot of ways it's not. So there was a one-time budget cut to the police department for $880,000, right, or 889 over that, but not by much. But that's not enough to fund a department for multiple years, right? So we sort of have to think about what the budget might be. Is that budget, is the police budget always going to be cut by that same amount? Is there free cash that's going to fund this new department, over the years, right? Even if it starts small and it's something that grows, the resources are eventually going to end at some point. And so I think for this, it's just the idea that if you're moving duties around, that some form of fund transfer should also occur, right? So if police aren't responding to something, just like if the fire department stopped responding to a particular type of call, right? If they were getting funding to do that, they would stop. And so, there are a lot of different funding opportunities. But at the end of the day, Northampton's budget is finite, right? It's $117,000 somewhere in there, in a given year. And so just thinking about where we direct or reinvest funds, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just from the police. It could be anywhere. If we're funneling in and this Department of Care, absorbs other functions, from other departments, then you would just have that money, the money to continue those functions. And it's not necessarily a one-to-one, right? There's not like the same dollar amount. As you said, there's going to be different costs, how much it costs per hour for a police officer versus an EMT versus, peer workers in any sense. I still want to push that our recommendations include fair and equitable wages for the people that are doing work. If we're advocating for peer-led response under a new department, that they still get paid well, and enough to live on, but it might not be the same, so those things are there. It's just an equivalent, but I guess we could change that word to some amount there, so that we're funding the programs that we want to see, so that we're not setting them up for failure. That was all.
Thank you, Dan. I saw Booker and Nick, but and who am I missing? Josie, you're still up. I'm sorry, Alex, Booker, and Josie, you're still in?
Yeah, I have one more comment, yeah.
Okay, and then Nick, and then maybe we can wrap up the discussion as we look at the time to get us closer date. So Alex, Booker, Josie, and Nick. Alex.
Great. So thanks. I was a yellow light on this one. I said that probably more flexibility is needed here than a straight one-to-one, because the needs and costs of each department vary. And so perhaps the intention of this is to say that the staff of newly funded departments should be paid fairly. I've also heard some other things in those comments. I also just wanted to do a note about budgets increasing, that generally every budget will increase, and in many cases, you want to see a cost of living increase. Now, historically, the police department has seen a much greater cost of living increase than, say, the school department for the stat, the payroll, and so that's a concern. And for sure. But if you look at, say there was a 3% cost of living increase each year, over 10 years, that's 34% increase. So it would be useful, I think, to compare that 40% increase with the increases of the other departments to get a more accurate sense of, are we increasing the policing budget by a lot more than we're increasing the other budgets? And I think that might be the case.
Thank you, Alex. Booker?
So I had a green light for this because I just like the philosophy of it. However, I actually agree with what Alex just said. I think we're going to need a lot more flexibility about this, because I think one of the issues about this is, are we going to talk about, we just want to cut the budget by this X amount without being specific about why that's the amount? That's what makes me uncomfortable about the abolish thing, is why that amount? Or are we going to say, here are the specific programs we want to fund right now? We want to fund a new department, or we want to switch funding from this to this. So I'm for this. I greenlit this philosophically, but I actually agree with Alex. I don't know how we would do this or how we would format it. And I think something we need to reach consensus about is, are we going to be specific about what things we want to fund with specific cost estimates? Or are we going to be, and I'm going to purposefully use this word, vague, and say, well, 50% seems like a good number. I'm purposely being provocative by saying that, without saying what it is we're going to do if we cut the budget by 50%, which I think is really important. By the way, I consider the $880,000 that was cut a dead issue. It's going to, by the time this stuff rolls around, we might have well thrown that, use that to fertilize the organic fields down in Florence. I think our continuing to worry about that is not going to turn out to be useful. I think what's going to be more useful is, how will we make certain that if there is a budget cut, will it get directed to the things that we needed to get directed to?
Thank you, Booker. Just to remind folks, we have 8 minutes. So Nick, Josie, Javier, and Alex, I think you put your hand up again, but we'll go with Nick. Okay.
I'll be really quick. Booker and Alex have both expressed my thoughts on this. I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Josie and Javier.
So this is actually something that I've given a lot of thought to recently, is this idea of budgets and cutting the budget, and what does that look like? And like something that hit me earlier today actually was that, when we allocate budget, those departments in the government don't just suddenly spend all that money day one. It's something that happens over the course of a year. And so something that I think would be actually really interesting is that if you took a portion of the police's budget and earmarked it for transferability, right? So as we are developing these infrastructures, as we are hiring these people, that is when you start to move those funds. You don't do it all at once so much as you do it when those things come up. Once we have peer-led responders in place and we can start paying them, salaries, that is when you start moving the funds from the police to those things. Once we build the infrastructure for this new department, that is when you start moving those funds to this place. So something that I think we should and consider maybe as a model is to say, hopefully within the next, say, 5 years, we cut the police budget by 50%. So that way we can get our feet on the ground, and the police can also be funded in the meantime as we transfer those responsibilities. I don't think that that's something impossible. It might be a little bit more bureaucratic and messy, but I think that's something that we should think about.
Thank you, Josie. Javier.
Yeah, so I was going to say, a big portion of what I was going to say, Josie already said it. What I also would add is, I don't think we need to sort of start making things at this stage complicated today in relation to where the money is going to go, equivalency 1-to-1. I don't think that's the spirit of this right now, at least. But certainly one of the things that I hope we're gonna shoot for is the fact that it's something really simple. If a service is not being given anymore, that should also reflect in the budget. It's any department. If they are not doing it anymore, and that was stated as some allocation money, that item should not be there, and the budget should be updated. It's really simple. I don't see any sort of, higher level physics on this.
Thank you, Javier. Nick, were you back in again? Okay. Maybe Dan help me out here, but I think we can work with these two items. And at our next meeting, we can dive a little deeper into the yellows or just come up with, yes, we're all on the same page with the greens. But this gives us a good platform. Javier, I'm sorry, are you still in? I saw your hand up there. Okay. So does that sound like a good plan to folks? We'll just move forward on this, do some rewording for the next meeting. And we want to get into, I think, also talking about the department a bit more in more detail. Any last words before looking for a motion? I don't think there's anything else on the agenda. Do I hear a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. Do we do the roll first or no? We hear a motion, right?
Yep, motion first.
Motion. Do I hear a motion to end this meeting tonight?
Yep.
Motion to adjourn.
We have
Second.
We have about 9 people saying let's go. So Noah, can you call the roll, please?
Booker,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Michael, oh, Michael's not here. Josie,
Yes.
Cynthia,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
and Chris.
Yes.
Awesome.
Great discussion, everyone. Thank you to the NAN people who came this evening, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks,
Okay.
Cynthia.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dan.
Thank you very much.